Experiences as a church chaplain and demonologist. I've been asked many times now in responses and conversations in this sub and others to share my experiences as an Order of the St. John chaplain and demonologist. It's hard to know where to start, to be honest, but the most important thing, I think, is to say that these are my beliefs and my experiences. I certainly don't begrudge you and yours, and definitely don't want to assert any kind of authority over the beliefs of others. As chaplains, we're not positioned within a church because we minister to communities. It isn't our place to judge any member of that community, but only to care for and support them in their needs. As rule number 1 of the job is to disprove, and disprove again. Other than that, to save you the trouble, I'll write things in order of how much interest I think they'd get, experiences, some insights into our processes, which I'm allowed to speak of, how I got into the field, and then the training I undertook. Experiences. General and passive paranormal experiences are part of the parcel of the job. I'll touch on it more later, but I'm not afraid of things that go bump in the night. I used to be, but once you've studied and understood it, the paranormal loses its excitement and becomes more of a puzzle that needs to be solved. My passive experiences are things like every month or so I'll have a new knocking on our doors and windows. Even though we live in a secure 3rd-floor apartment, I get random prods and pokes when I'm by myself, whispering, murmuring, growling, and scratching, electrical interference, random mists, distorted shadows, and shadow figures here and there. This has all become weekly occurrences, although when I say that, it's usually just one of these things that happens. I deal with it, then it goes away almost immediately. The hitchhiker. This is probably my most fascinating one, because it's a reoccurring event that happens every couple of months, and I haven't yet solved the puzzle. I travel a lot for my role, and at the moment, I've been sent to one of our small towns to train people, run mental health programs, or help with large-scale crisis responses. This results in my driving for long hours, sometimes during the day and sometimes at night. I'll see the same stocky, hitchhiking figure walking along the side of the road in a black hoodie and jeans with the hood up, thumb out. I've never stopped, and he's never turned around when I've approached. I've seen him at every point in the day, dawn, day, dusk, night. I've seen him in locations several-hour drives from each location. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but hitchhiking is really uncommon in our country. We're small and buses are cheap. Howling. This is another recurring one, although it's newer. It's more annoying than anything else, to be honest. But several times my partner and I have been woken up to a long howl in our bedroom. We're windows closed, apartment unit like I said, but it's ruining my sleep and I really enjoy my sleep. Cloaked figure. This is one that I've thankfully resolved, but had to deal with over a series of years. To cut a long story short, whenever I was in the middle of a really tough case supporting someone in what we call spiritual warfare, I'd get a visit from whatever this was. It was the same every time, where I would have a dream of a cloaked figure, wake up to a spinning room and be choking. I've had sleep paralysis episodes before, but this was certainly different. I'm still half convinced this was some kind of sleep apnea maybe, an issue or an episode. The only thing that makes me think it was paranormal is because it happened without fail when I dreamt of this figure, and it stopped after I put some intentional work into stopping it. There are experiences of clients that I can't share because I've made a strictly confidential agreement with them, and that'll rest on my soul. But generally speaking, I've helped people deal with their psychological issues more than spiritual. Some spiritual ones have been fascinating, though, and there's a feeling I get when there's a really obvious sign of oppression or infestation. It's like a heavy feeling on my chest and stuffy air. I've helped people by blessing their houses, which is a complicated process, and depending on your beliefs, it can be somewhat risky. You essentially have to call forth the oppressing force, challenge it, rebuke it, and either condemn it or suppress it if it can't be dealt with in one blessing. I've also helped people with deliverance, although I'm not big on the evangelical deliverance ministry. We're a more traditional denomination. But I've never helped with an exorcism. I'm still relatively young for my role, and while I'm commissioned member of the order, I'm not yet fully ordained as a minister. We have to be careful with what we share, and that's for a really insane reason. We often get people who either want to play a prank or desperately want something paranormal to happen, and the information we don't share is essentially the key information we need while triaging our cases. What I can say is how we view the paranormal, and it's unusual. Anything paranormal by our ideology is demonological, angelic, or the Holy Spirit. When it comes to things that we humans get scared of, we're hardwired to be scared of the paranormal if we believe in it. It's a non-interactable nocturnal threat. And we're a diurnal creature. It's really easy to trigger our limbic system. However, and again, just my view, I see paranormal activity as parlor tricks of the damned and jealous entities. But I have the power to send them back where they belong. And they know that. So it's always a struggle, however it can. It will try and scare me because it's scared of me. And it should be. I'm there to do a job. It's like spiritual pest extermination. But a moving cup, whispering or growling, etc., is nowhere as scary to me as, say, driving in heavy rain or things I deal with as a bouncer while I studied. Humans, dogs, even cats are more dangerous than most hauntings or paranormal experiences. One exception is that possession is incredibly dangerous, but intensely rare. I'm not scared of these things, not because I'm tough or brave, but because they're not actually dangerous, and they need to be condemned. That being said, if we go through an intensive investigatory process, it looks like this. We're a medical order. We're the Knights Hospitalier. We're also an indigenous-focused arm of the order, and our indigeneity gives us a different world view. When we assess a person, we don't just look at their spiritual health. We look at their social, physical, and psychological health as well. The first thing we do, fully funded, is have the person see a doctor and psychologist for assessment. This isn't because we think they're crazy, it's because we're building a comprehensive profile for exactly what we're dealing with. If someone is positive for physical or mental health issues that could be causing problems that they believe are spiritual, we need to treat those and see if the symptoms go away. Our church fully covers any costs associated with this process. If that doesn't solve the problems, my job is to definitively disprove the existence of paranormal activity or presences. But to do so while believing there may well be a presence. Skepticism is a good thing most of the time, but it's sometimes bad. We're not there to assume the issue is mundane. We take all the information we can, assess it, and arrive at the likely outcomes, and we consider spiritual outcomes to be similarly as likely as mundane ones. However, we still need to disprove all of the mundane theories we can. But there's another layer. We also need to prove all of the mundane theories. This helps us have the quality of information, so we won't be happy to say, oh, it's probably just this mundane thing, unless we can prove that. After this, if there's a persistence of a spiritual issue, we begin our church-sanctified processes of blessing and protections for the affected individual. These interventions vary on intensity depending on the person, their faith relationship, and the persistence of whatever we're dealing with. How I got into the field. I didn't take a standard pathway. A standard pathway is that you attend a church that believes in demonological study. Get as involved as possible with whatever you can, talk to the pastor about your desire to study and follow this pathway, and see if the church will support you. It's a long pathway, though. You can also try to become a lay chaplain for certain denominations, but honestly, the best thing you can do is wholeheartedly commit to a church. Show them that you're willing, and they'll support your journey. My pathway was that I studied a youth psych degree and specialized in youth gangs. Then a church was investigating into the community and looking for a Christian with my expertise to be their youth pastor. I worked there for some time, and after a bit of a journey, came back to my home denomination, and that's who I work for now. I got a master's in professional practice complacency and a diploma in demonology, but my psychology knowledge is what sets me apart for this ministry in the eyes of the church. I'm much more equipped to do referral assessment than many of the clergy or congregation. My training in demonology comes from several sources. I completed the diploma at Bible college, but I've also done a small amount of training under a course from the Bishop, James Long. I did the Paranormal Academy of the United Kingdom online course because it's a non-Christian, and I trained under our Archbishop for some time to specifically respond to the needs of the community in this particular regard. As a chaplain, this calling fit under my purview in his eyes. When I need to escalate church involvement, I can go straight to him. He taught me our beliefs, blessings, the processes of our church, things like that. He also taught me that our church's stance on demonology, which is pretty old school. We're Anglican, King James was a demonologist, so it's a particular field for us. That's pretty much it. I'm always open for helping people on here, so if you have trouble, please just reach out through a message. I'm also happy to answer questions and engage in discourse, although I'm not going to need to maybe entirely engage in what-ifs from the stories. But for me, it's almost impossible to prove the paranormal online due to the nature of the evidence and how easy it can be to be faked. So, I'm not going to go into that. And I've peer-reviewed these things with my colleagues. A house in northern Maine. This telling is about something odd that happened many years after I lived in the house. I'll omit the bulk of the background. I lived in a 1900 farmhouse in northern Maine, in Aroostook County, along the border of Canada. The house was a small 2-story clapboard-sided farmhouse. The central heat was a giant handcrafted metal stove. It was large enough to fit a log a foot in diameter and 3 feet long, and sat in the middle of the dirt-floored basement. The stove was so airtight that you could throw in several chunks of split hardwood and dog it down tight. Then you crack the air vent just a tiny bit, and the fire would smolder all night, with heat drifting up through the vents and ducts. It was the main heat in the house, although there were 2 additional cast-iron wood stoves. I lived there with my father and his girlfriend. My father would spend a lot of time working on the property, clearing brush. He also worked on scraping and peeling paint and applying new, fresh coats. Although he refused to invest money in the house, so many of his repairs were low quality and incomplete. After I moved away, I stayed away for over 15 years. One day, my wife and I were staying at a hotel a few hours away, and we found ourselves with a free day to randomly explore. We ended up driving back to the area of that house and decided to make it our destination. The area hadn't changed much. The area is very sparse with lots of dense trees and large grassy yards and fields, farms here and there. We turned off the U.S. Highway 1 onto the road named Wilcox Settlement Road. The house was maybe a quarter mile down. The sun was low in the late afternoon sky, a bit above the trees. I pulled up at the end of the driveway, or dooryard as the locals call it, and stopped in the road. The house was a wreck and in much worse shape than when my father had owned it. There were a few beat-up cars parked by the house. There were barrels and scrap wood and random old junk all around the yard and the porch. Much of the siding had also been removed, exposing mylar-backed foam insulation boards that had been pressed between the studs and the exterior walls. There was an old, dented, rusty pickup truck, parked closest to the road, where it sat idling. My foot on the brake, my wife and I sat gaping at the creepy old dilapidated house. The yard was overgrown, and the brush had reclaimed most of what my father had laboriously cleared all those years ago. Movement caught my eye in the dimming light. A waving hand. There was a man standing on the other side of the old pickup truck, and he was slowly waving his arm, beckoning us toward him. He was a large, overweight man, late 30s to mid-40s, dressed in a dirty work coat. His mouth was open in a gap-toothed smile, and he just stood there. Still except for his upraised right arm, slowly beckoning us to pull into the driveway. I was frightened. First of all, we didn't see him initially, so it caught us off guard to have him standing as close as he was. Secondly, the way he stood there watching us beckoning reminded me of a scene from a backwoods horror film. The man's smile seemed to be cunning and a veneer of harmlessness, bellied by a bleary cold glint of greed or worse. I instinctively floored the accelerator and sped away. I hate that house. It was a very bad place. I felt like it was stained with bleak sadness, fear, and loneliness. Haunted house in Ventura. There's a house in downtown Ventura that's reportedly very haunted. It's a huge old house. My sister met a woman who used to live there. It has 7 bedrooms spread over 4 levels. I'm not quite sure what the architect called the type of it, so I'll just describe it as an old wood frame house with an antique ornate style, picturesque, set on the foothill overlooking downtown and the ocean and the Channel Islands. When I lived in the area, the house was vacant. During my frequent late-night walks, I'd sometimes sneak up the 24 front stairs and peer in the window, or walk around back. Occasionally, I'd bring a date up there to fool around on the porch swing. It was vacant for a long time. My sister told me the house was haunted, and once when she was visiting the house, a floor lamp suddenly slid across the living room, apparently of its own volition. Startled, she looked at her friend, the woman who lived there, and she kind of shrugged and said that things like that occurred frequently. They would often hear noises from the upper floor. There was another tenant who resided up there, and sometimes they would also hear noises, like someone talking or walking around, only to find out later that the tenant was not even at home. She eventually moved out, and sometime later I met her, and I asked her about the house. She confirmed the lamp story and said that many things happened up there, and that she moved out because of that. She hated living there. She said, "Let me show you something." She pulled out her phone and flipped to a photograph of a young man sitting on a sofa in front of a dark picture window, or maybe glass sliding doors. She said that was her son on the couch. The photo was just kind of a typical random snapshot of a kid sitting on a couch. Also in the photo was a large swirl of white smoke to the right of the kid. It looked like cigarette smoke that had drifted in front of the lens. Except when I looked closer, I was startled and frightened by what I noticed about it. There was a very clearly defined face in the smoke, not a human face, but one of a creature with elongated muzzle and a head shaped like a canine. The mouth was open, showing large, sharp, pointy teeth. The eyes were fierce and appeared to be looking into the camera. I truly hate to say it, but I tend to roll my eyes at stories like this, but it's best described as a dragon or demon face. I don't believe in demons. The image was unmistakable and gave me chills and goosebumps. The woman said that she hadn't seen anything when she took the photo, that it was just a casual snapshot of her son while they were sitting and watching television. She managed to get the landlord and reluctantly let her out of the lease after she told him everything that happened there. Eventually, they found tenants. There were old cars and beat-up motorcycles out front, and junk stored on the porches and balconies, so they didn't appear to be neat, clean, orderly tenants, and the house looked in need of repairs and maintenance. I never met the new residents, but I wonder if they had any experiences in that creepy old house. Ghost that mimics footsteps of family members. I've been looking online for someone with a similar experience, but I keep finding forums of people describing a spirit that mimics their loved ones' voices. When I was 16, my family moved to a house in Indiana, and we only lived there for about a year before moving back to my hometown. But during that year, it was really hard. There was a lot of negative energy in the home because my mom had a mental illness, and there was just a lot of fighting and crying going on. I bring this up because I also see people describing spirits who maybe feed off of negativity. And that was just a really hard year, so maybe that helps identify the ghost. Anyway, it's not out of the ordinary for my dad to get a glass of water or juice at like 2 a.m. out of nowhere. And during this time, me and my sister were sleeping on the couch, together a lot, because we would just fall asleep. Whatever was on Netflix would just keep going. And one night, I hear my dad's footsteps clearly. And I know that they're my dad's because he has a heavy footstep. I even heard the fridge open, clear as day. But I just thought it was my dad, so I yelled over, "Can you get me an iced tea?" And there was no response, so I look over from the back of the couch. The kitchen was behind the couch. And it was just a dark-ass kitchen. No footsteps were heard of him going back to his room, so I was confused. When I ran to his bedroom to see him snoring, I was really scared, but I didn't want to acknowledge what had just happened. So I watched Netflix until I could go to sleep that night. Okay, so fast forward a few months later. My sister's room is in the basement in this house. An unfinished basement, too, so kind of creepy to stay in that room yourself. So I slept there a lot, too, and I would chill in the room with her. One day we're smoking in her bedroom, and the door is open. Broad daylight, might I add. And we hear the sound of someone barefoot, running back and forth in front of the door, on the cement floors of the basement. Like clear as day, we could hear the padding of feet just slapping against the cement. I couldn't believe my sister was witnessing this with me, but we were so scared we just closed the door. Nothing has happened since then, while we stayed there. So what was that? It didn't mimic voices, but it did mimic my dad's footsteps that night. Not sure about the basement footsteps. It sounded lighter, the running. So could it be my mom or my sister? But has anyone ever experienced something similar? Is this a mimic spirit? Paranormal encounter with lift. As a 17-year-old, I've lived in the same apartment building my entire life, but my family and I are finally moving out soon to a bigger flat. The building itself is not much older than me, but the elevator's always been kind of wonky and prone to breaking down. At times, it would activate on its own and go to a random floor, or doors would get stuck for no good reason, 10 seconds before finally closing, causing frustration for those inside. However, for the past year or two, I can't remember the exact duration, something strange has been happening with the elevator. It's been opening its doors on the ground floor every time I enter the building, as if it's waiting for me. At first, I thought it was a coincidence because, as I mentioned, the elevator is constantly malfunctioning. But it kept happening, every single time, like it was timing my entry to the building and opening its doors exactly when I took the first 2 steps toward it. It never missed the mark. It always opened on the exact step I took. The strange thing is that it only happens when I'm alone and returning to the building. It doesn't happen when I'm with someone else or leaving the building. It's like the elevator is waiting for me specifically. The odd behavior doesn't stop there either. It seems to get angry when I try to avoid it. By taking the stairs instead, the elevator doors would aggressively shut, as if it was trying to force me to take it. I've tried to test it, if it's just a coincidence, by opening the building's entrance door and waiting to see if the elevator would close on its own, but it never does. It always waits for me. At first I was creeped out and paranoid about the strange behavior, but now I've become so accustomed to it that it doesn't even faze me anymore. However, I can't help but worry that this strange elevator behavior will continue in a new building, since it also has an elevator. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena, but this strange occurrence is still unsettling. I've tried to confide in my friends about it, but they don't take me seriously. I'm afraid to tell my parents because I don't want them to think I'm crazy or brush it off as nothing. This elevator's become a strange and unsettling part of my daily routine, and I wanted to share my story because it's been bothering me for quite some time now. What does it mean when a ghost hides things on you? I've lived in this house 20 years, and over the years, things have gone missing and then showed back right in front of our faces. One time, my mom, for the life of her, couldn't find her bracelet. She takes it off every night and leaves it on her nightstand. She searched and searched for days with no avail. A few mornings later, the bracelet showed up right in front of the coffee pot. My mom is an avid coffee drinker, at least 2 every morning and even at night. There's no way she missed it. Another time, my asthma inhaler went missing. I used it the night before and put it on my sock drawer right next to my bed, and this top drawer is reachable and holds snacks and other things I may want in the night. I got up the next morning and went to work. At this time in my life, I was dealing with severe asthma that I never had an ounce in the past. I called my mom from work, she's always been a stay-at-home mom, and asked her if she could bring my inhaler to work for me because I forgot and I couldn't breathe. Mind you, I had just filled the prescription the day before. She looks where I tell her to look. She calls back, says it's not there. I tell her, yes it is. I just used it before bed. She looks again and searches the house. Nothing. Mind you, my mother finds everything. She always sees things I can't find. She calls me back again saying it's nowhere and that I must have it. I look again. I don't have it. I call the pharmacy. Now I happen to know the girl who works there. She went to school with my sister and she recognizes my voice. She tells me since I pick up, I'll ring it through the register next week and have you pay for it then, once insurance will cover it again. My mother picks it up and brings it to me at work. At this particular time, my grandmother was visiting from Florida, and she had dinner over at my house with my parents. I stroll in from work at about 9 p.m. I walk into the kitchen where my mom had just cleared away all the dishes from dinner. I go to pull out a chair at the table, and I go, "Seriously, Mom?" My inhaler was in the middle of the kitchen table. My mother, in shock, just says, "What?" I go, "It's right here." She says to me, "Melissa, I just ate dinner at this table, cleared it and set the table before we ate, and cleared and wiped it after we ate. It was not there." It's still a mystery why this stuff happened. Is that just a spirit getting a kick out of blowing our minds? Can someone tell me what this means or is? During my childhood, specifically when I was around 8 or 9, I used to wake up early in the morning and watch television. However, on one particular night, something strange happened that I couldn't explain. As I was descending down the stairs, I heard a faint giggle from the living room, and I immediately assumed that it was my younger sister playing a prank on me. Despite the darkness that surrounded me, I continued to walk down the stairs, expecting to see my sibling's playful face. To my surprise, there was no one in the room, and neither the television nor the lights were on. It was a strange feeling of fear mixed with curiosity that engulfed me as I tried to investigate what was going on. Suddenly, a little girl who I believed to be a ghost ran past me, holding a stuffed animal in one hand and an unidentifiable object in the other. The girl's laughter echoed through the house as she darted from the living room into the kitchen, and within a few seconds, she had disappeared entirely. The little girl had curly hair and was dressed in an old-fashioned attire that I'd never seen before. It was an unsettling experience, and for a while I kept it to myself, wondering if anyone else had ever witnessed anything similar in the house. However, I later found out that nobody had ever died in that house or the neighboring houses, and it was built by my great-grandparents. Despite my investigations, I couldn't find any rational explanation for what I saw that night. It remains a mystery to this day, and I often wonder if it was a ghost or just my imagination playing tricks on me. My ghost is a real pain in the ass, and I need him to leave my house. Approximately 3 days ago, I started noticing a series of footsteps and vibrations that seemed to originate from someone walking around my house. However, as time progressed, this entity has become a constant annoyance, pestering me to no end. Despite my age of 71 and my status as a non-veteran living alone, I'd never believed in the existence of ghosts and the like. However, the situation has caused me to reassess my beliefs, as this thing has become as real as the rain is to me. Despite being invisible to me, this entity has been causing me endless aggravation. He now spends the majority of his time in my house, and I'm unable to make him leave. He vibrates my bed so much that it shakes me awake, forcing me to sleep on the couch instead. He's even gone so far as to become more daring, continuously walking around and vibrating the floors, forcing me to tell him to sit down and be quiet. His arrival has become so obvious that I can pinpoint his exact presence by the noises and sounds that he makes. Initially, I was unafraid of him, but he started to creep me out on a few occasions. I've tried being cordial to him, but it doesn't seem to work. Now I curse him like hell because I no longer care about being polite. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have any effect either. I need this entity to leave me alone and vacate my home once and for all. The situation has escalated to the point that it's the craziest thing I've ever witnessed. At first it was fascinating, but now it's made me mad as hell, and I'm powerless to stop him from coming and going as he pleases, and I can't do anything to make him listen to me. As I write this, he's present, and I can't stand the sight of him. I've exhausted all of my options and I have nothing else to try. Therefore, I'm willing to pay somebody who can assist me in getting rid of this entity. He must leave, no matter how it's accomplished. I was happy before he arrived, and I won't be content again until he's gone. Antique mirror. One day my husband and I decided to visit his mother at her friend's house in the countryside, which wasn't too far from our own residence. The house was quite old and had a distinct 1930s feel to it, though it could have even been older than that. The house was filled with antiques and it had an eerie feel to it. Apparently, the previous owner of the house, who had lived there for many, many years, passed away upstairs. I couldn't remember the exact cause of death, but I think it was old age. As we were exploring the living room, my eyes were drawn to a massive antique mirror that had dominated one wall. Being a bit vain, I couldn't resist taking a look at myself in it. However, just as I was admiring my reflection, I felt something poke behind my neck. It was like a bony finger slowly prodding the back of my skull. I was completely freaked out by this sudden and unexpected sensation. Immediately, I turned around and asked my husband and mother-in-law if they had touched me, but they both denied it. I was sure that they hadn't, as I would have seen their reflection in the mirror. It was as if something or someone was trying to taunt me for looking into it. I wondered if it was the spirit of the previous owner, or even the mirror itself, that was responsible for the eerie sensation. From that moment on, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me in the house. It was almost as if the antique objects in the house had a life of their own and they were communicating with me in their own way. I couldn't help but wonder if the house was haunted or if the previous owner's spirit was still lingering. The experience has left a lasting impression on me, and I found myself unable to forget about it for weeks afterward. It made me wonder about the power of objects and how they can retain the energy of people who once owned them. It also made me more mindful of the potential for supernatural phenomena in our daily lives, and how we should always be open to the unexpected. So I bought a doll today with an attachment and just wanted to share what happened already. Let me tell you a story about an incredible experience that I had recently. It all started when I acquired a new addition to my collection, a doll with an unusual history. Upon getting her into my car, I immediately tested her with an EMF reader and a spirit box. The EMF was going crazy and the spirit box gave a clear message: don't. I stopped and apologized to the spirit, hoping to make it feel more comfortable. During the drive home, I spoke to the spirit of the doll. assuring it that it was in good hands now, and that it would be well taken care of. I treated it as if I were talking to a friend, hoping to ease any fears or doubts it might have. Once we arrived home, I placed the doll on top of my entertainment center, high up, where it would be safe. I left it there for a while to get used to its new surroundings. When I returned to check on it, I decided to do another test with the EMF and spirit box. This time, the spirit box instructed me to hold it higher. And when I did, it asked, "What do you want me to do?" The spirit was causing the EMF to bottom out instead of spike, which was unusual. So I asked it to make the meter go the other way, and it did. Then the spirit bot asked me, "Am I dead?" I responded with a yes, and asked for its name. It replied, "Soon." And then everything stopped. It was almost as if the spirit was in shock, realizing that it was dead and needed time to process it. I was amazed by this experience and wanted to share it with you all. It just goes to show that sometimes the unexpected can happen, and we should always be open to new experiences. Who knows what other incredible things might be out there waiting for us to discover. Alrighty, I'll give it a try, but you'll be missing out on some crucial aspects. Counselors in the woods and shaking trees, the 4-week-long build-up, having 10 other kids gathered around the campfire with you, etc., etc. But I'll do my damnedest. Once in a long time past, a story was told, a story that was meant to keep children from straying out by night, a traditional story about a man with a very long arm and very long legs and with no face, all dressed up as if snatching a child was a special occasion. They said if you saw the man, you had to run right home or he would get you, or you would never be seen again. Cue tree shaking and shit. Now this was just a scary story to tell children, but as some kids found out, in every horror story, there is a grain of truth. Sometimes someone's little boy or girl would be out too late, and they just wouldn't come home. Maybe they just fell in a river or were washed away, or maybe someone snatched them up, and they were just gone forever, but whatever the cause, those children had just vanished. Now, as stories are wont to do, they followed their storyteller wherever they went, be it to the next town over to scare the children there about how little Jimmy had disappeared, or to a whole continent, as the story did when colonists started to go there in what we now call America. The new colonists realized very quickly that their new land was nothing like their ancestral home. It was much more dangerous, and all of a sudden, the need to have their kids home at night grew greatly. They kept the same story, as all the kids knew it already, but they started to change some things. All of a sudden, you couldn't run home and tell your parents, "There was a man out there, he was so scary. I'm sorry for being out late, protect me," but instead, if you saw the scary man, you just weren't seen again. As I said earlier, sometimes kids never came home, but all of a sudden, children weren't coming home more and more frequently. Oftentimes, a child that stayed out after dark would come home stricken and terrified, telling stories about how a tall man with no face followed them all the way home, only to take them days or weeks later. Cue screaming in the dark woods behind me. Eventually, the village men realized this was getting out of hand, gathered up their assortment of old-timely weapons and started a search in the woods. Unfortunately for the children of the town, but fortunately for their musket-bearing fathers, no such man was found. The men went home, laughed manly laughs, patted their children on the heads, and went about their business. Well, that is until the disappearances started again. This time the men would bring children who had seen the Slender Man, as he had been dubbed, and all of a sudden, there started to be sightings. Children would point out a tree that wasn't a tree, but a tall man that no one had seen before. These searches started to yield casualties as the spirit that followed them to America started taking even the adults who saw him. People started to slowly figure out that if you saw him, then others around would see him as well. And after a sighting, people who saw the Slender Man would take their own lives rather than be taken and risk loved ones seeing him as well. The victims of Slender Man were doomed then, and they're still doomed today. For Slender Man is your fear, He is an old and vengeful fae from the old homeland of humanity. The stories told fed him the fear and made him grow stronger until he grew greater and greater so that he no longer needed the stories. All it took was for someone to be out alone in the woods, and they would feel it, their fear, feeding him. Once they had reached your peak of horror, he would take you and would never let you be seen again. Oftentimes, someone cannot see him once and reach this peak, however, so he follows you wherever you go. He is your own personal horror that no one else can see, unless of course you show someone else, in which case they're just as doomed as you. And don't go thinking that you're safe if you show someone else, because here's the kicker. He isn't just one place. He is everywhere. Just by dooming your friend, you weren't escaping. You were just feeding him, making him stronger. So children, the moral of the story is this. Never travel by yourself. He likes loners. Never travel by night. That's his time. Now, most importantly, don't ever look at the trees. That's his place. My only experience with the paranormal, and it's been stuck in my head every day for over a decade. This happened in the summer of 2009, during the storyteller's junior year of high school. It's a vivid recollection that's seared into their memory. They weren't under the influence of any substances, nor were they sleep deprived. In fact, they were both on their way home from a summer job at a fast food joint. They rode in an open Jeep with the top off and the doors removed to fully embrace the summer weather. As they turned onto the road that was a frequent shortcut home, the storyteller was playing Tetris on their flip phone. They were chatting with their best friend John about their shift that night when suddenly John slammed on the brakes so hard that the storyteller's phone and food flew off their lap. The storyteller looked at their left to ask what the problem was when they saw John staring ahead, eyes bulging and face drained of color. As the storyteller looked ahead, they saw what could only be described as a hunched-over hooded figure with a small pointed head, about 7 feet in front of them crossing the road. It appeared to be using a walking stick and had a limp. The way it moved wasn't natural, and it seemed to glide rather than walk. It turned its head to look at them as it crossed the road, but they couldn't discern any facial features. The storyteller and John were both transfixed and watched as it crested over the hill towards the children's cemetery. The storyteller had the impression that it was female, but they couldn't explain why. The storyteller and John have discussed this frequently, but they've not found anything online that describes what they saw. Most of the ghost stories they've come across are one-person accounts and lack detail. Therefore, they welcome any feedback or comment that anyone may have, whether it's a question or a private message. Any input that would be immensely appreciated. This event is stuck with the storyteller, and it's a vivid memory that they'll never forget. Can I make myself more prone to paranormal experiences? Let me tell you a story about a series of strange events that have happened to one person over the course of their life. It all started with a woman who appeared in the park near their house for 2 summers in a row. She was always wearing a hijab, completely black, and would stand still on the path for hours on end. It was an eerie sight, and the person couldn't help but feel like there was something not quite right about her presence. But that was just the beginning. One morning, they woke up to find that the landing light, which they'd always left on at night, was already on. It was as if someone had turned it on while they were sleeping. The strange thing was, everything else was still dark, and it took a moment for their eyes to adjust to the sudden change in light. It was almost as if they had woken up in a different reality, one where the light was already on. The next experience was even more paranormal. They were house and dog sitting for their nan and granddad, and one day they heard football chants coming from the bedroom. They went to investigate and found that an old 70s-era TV had turned on by itself. It was a spooky experience, but the person felt a strange sense of comfort in knowing that spirits might be real. This feeling was especially poignant because of the person's own history with loss and grief. Their father had passed away when they were just 4 years old, and they'd carried the pain and trauma with them their whole life. They longed to know if they could somehow connect with him, if there was a way to make themselves open to the possibility of his presence. These strange occurrences may seem unrelated, but to the person experiencing them, they all seem to be connected in some way. It's as if the universe is trying to send them a message, or maybe just trying to get their attention. Whatever the reason, they're left with a sense of wonder and curiosity about the unknown and a deep longing to connect with the spirits that might be out there. I really need help. The following is a story that I've been grappling with for the past decade, and it continues to impact me on a daily basis. I was 18 years old when I stumbled upon a Ouija board in my basement. At the time, I was unaware of the potential dangers of using such a board or the existence of demons and spirits. Out of sheer boredom, I decided to give the board a try. To my disappointment, nothing happened. However, what I didn't know at the time was that I failed to properly close the session by moving the indicator to goodbye. That night I went to sleep and woke up the next morning. I was experiencing extreme psychosis. I immediately went to the hospital and the doctors couldn't explain what was happening to me. From that day forward, I've been plagued with severe psychotic episodes and other sinful tendencies. Deep down, I knew that it was the Ouija board that caused this, even though I had no prior knowledge of the risks associated with using it. Despite my certainty, no one believed me, and I felt alone in my struggles. It wasn't until later that I learned about the workings of demons and how they could infiltrate our lives through objects like the Ouija board. As the years went on, my condition only worsened, and I felt like I was losing control of myself. It has been a decade since that fateful night, and I'm now 28 years old. The impact of that experience continues to weigh heavily on me, and I'm losing hope in myself and who I want to be. I'm reaching out for advice, because I don't know what else to do. I'm in desperate need of help, and any guidance would be greatly appreciated. This is a battle that I can't fight alone, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to overcome it. Wondering about my paranormal experiences. I'll start by saying, having these experiences, I've always been a skeptic. My mother, who's passed 9 years ago, was toward the end of her life a deep believer, as well as both of my sisters. Though after my mother's passing, they haven't spoken much on the subject unless asked about it. But they can verify 3 of the 4 stories I'm about to lay out there as well. The first 3 of these stories take place in my childhood home in a trailer park, and it always seemed to have an odd vibe around it in general. Never found anything weird about it, but we always had this theory like Indian burial grounds or something. Though I doubt it. Just a weird little rural area of southwest Michigan. The 4th story takes place in my father and stepmother's house, about 8 miles north of the first 3 stories where they take place. I'll start with what feels like the least intense, moving to the ones that still spark great fear in me. Story 1. I'll start with the story at my father and stepmother's house, as it's pretty simple. I lived there in my early 20s and had the classic downstairs basement room. I was the black sheep of the sort, so it was only fitting to put me there. We had a dog that always stayed with me, especially when the family was out and doing whatever. This happened multiple times, but I'll share the last time I remember it happening. I'm sitting downstairs hanging out, YouTube or whatever I was doing, while my dog, like he normally does when people come home, starts going nuts, barking and pacing for me to let him upstairs so he can greet whoever he believes to come through the door. As I get out of my chair to let him do so, I hear the classic footsteps of what I believe to be my little brother. As they're too fast to be my father or stepmom, I hear them go all the way to the back of the house and then stay there. So I let the dog out. I follow suit, thinking maybe my folks need help grabbing something, maybe they brought home. Get upstairs and nothing at all, lights off, no one home. Dog is even thinking, what the hell? Now at this point, this is the 4th or 5th time this has happened, and in the few years we'd been living there, mostly starting in the later part of those years. So this time I felt ballsy about it. I decided like an idiot to just ask if anyone was there, and no answer. So I go further into the house facing the hallway leading to the back of the house to a couple of bedrooms. I put myself in the bathroom so that when I yell at it, it won't see down the hallway when it comes to get my sorry ass. But I get in the bathroom and like an idiot, I somewhat angrily yelled, "Who the fuck is in my house?" As I point, I hear something fall in the back bedroom between the two bedrooms. I poke my head out to verify and no one's there. Check the garage to see and no one's there. And then went back downstairs when I waited for people to actually come. It's not the wildest story ever, but eerie to me. Story number 2. This is where to me these stories amp up and get really freaky. Just something about this trailer park and the trailer I lived in. This was after living in the trailer with my mom, who my dad then took over after their divorce and was now living there with my stepmom. So I remember it being maybe 2006. I was 13 or so, and at the time, loved being up as late as it was summer vacation from school. And this summer, I liked smoking pot with my sister late at night in the backyard with my neighborhood boy. This night, not pot. Just us three hanging out smoking cigarettes and talking. For some reason or another, my sister takes her phone out and I shit you not, for some reason starts recording an audio file. This was on a shit Nokia phone at the time and the quality's already shit on these things, but recording nonetheless. Not for anything paranormal, but thinking about it now, I don't remember for the life of me what she was trying to record. Point is, she's recording and we're all three standing there, when all of a sudden about 2 or 4 feet to my right, we all hear the most unsettling, blood-curdling, just nasty woman scream for a solid 2 seconds. Immediately being like, what in the fuck was that? Even getting so worked up that we called the police who didn't find anything after all, showing 20 minutes later. Best part? My sister the next day realized she had been recording this audio file. So she goes into her phone to review it, realizing that she had never thought to stop the recording. But there it was on her phone. So we listen back to it and everything's normal. You can hear us talking right up until this scream, which when this happens in the recording, you hear us go quiet. Then a static type silence. And then you hear us all go, what in the fuck was that? And then the recording cuts off for a few seconds. I always said it was a fox, but how loud it was and how close it was, the sound should have been on this recording, and it most definitely was not. Thoughts? Now, I have a hard time with these last 2 stories, as they're the only visual experiences I've had, and to me, are the absolute hardest to explain. Kind of leaves me feeling out of my wits even thinking about them, let alone about to type it all out. Story number 3. So to start, my mom was always a night owl. No exception even when we lived with her until 2005. I think this is somewhere around 2002 or 3. The bedroom I was in was right next to where the kitchen was, and you in fact could see right out into the kitchen, but couldn't see the table where we sat from. Here, the angle was cut off at that view. But it wouldn't have been off to the right of the bedroom door looking out. I remember waking up at about 3 or 4 a.m. or so, and looking out and seeing the dining room light on, and hearing my mom using her sewing machine at the table. So I yelled for her to come in there. I hear the machine stop, and she comes to the doorway. I just remember the most menacing, horrifying, mean look on her face. She just stood there, staring right at me, no words, no nothing. Just this look like, why the fuck are you talking to me right now? I don't really remember at this point if I said or did anything. While she stood there doing this, but just as quick as she was standing there, she just as quickly, still with no words at all, just turned first her head away, and then her body followed suit. And then she just walked away. This, as most would assume, is very much unlike anyone's mom. I very much remember as soon as she was out of sight, I started screaming and crying. And yet again, I hear her getting up from her sewing machine, and this time a little more frantic. She comes in asking, what's wrong? With the classic mom calming down horrified kid going on. So I told her what I'd literally just saw, and she said very plainly that she had not just been in here, and that she'd been sewing the whole time. And it's not like my mom to just come in and stare me down menacingly like that, especially at 3 in the morning to scare me. Thoughts? Story 4. My least favorite of these. I don't even like thinking about this one, but it's the one I wanted to bring here most, as I just want to know what others may think this thing is. So again, much like the last story, it's 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm in the same exact bedroom, bottom bunk. Sister's on the top bunk. And this time, everyone is asleep. All lights in the house are off, and it's pretty quiet. I hear what I believe is a slightly heavy load in our dryer, or maybe the washer machine, a little off balance. The sound wakes me all the way up because it just seems weird. So I roll over to get more comfy and I open my eyes a little bit. As I'm looking around, I see what's some kind of movement, and it's in the kitchen. Now again, you can see this from this room out into the kitchen, but not the dining area. And what you saw from my perspective is the island in the kitchen where the sink was. And you could see a little bit to the far side of our living room behind that. So I'm kind of scanning the kitchen, listening to this weird sound I keep hearing, and that's when I see it. I can't say it was standing, as I saw no legs, but standing or stood behind the island, but extremely tall. This very pale, almost 2D looking man, all white, no features whatsoever, no face, no nothing. As he looked down at his body, it appeared to me more faint, but still a definite white figure or person just stood there. At first I'm thinking it's headlight, maybe just hitting the window from a car outside, but then I realized that this thing has a cowboy type hat on, and not only that, it seems like it's taking its hat off and like tipping its hat in my direction, like it's tipping its hat at me almost. Now at this point I'm generally trying to make sure I'm 100% awake, and I am. So I'll go back to looking because naturally I just can't look away now. And it just repeats the same exact movements over and over. Pulls the hat down, puts it back on, pulls it down, then back on. All the while this weird sound still happening. So I'm trying to justify it in my mind by thinking somehow the neighbor kid is playing a prank on me. And somehow outside the window, that's a bit behind this thing using some sort of puppet or something. But when I realized how stupid a thought this is, that's when I started screaming. My sister wakes up and asks what the hell's going on, and I tell her exactly what I see, and I ask her if she sees it too. Oddly, no, she doesn't at all. This makes me scream more, this time waking up my mom, who, as she comes into the kitchen, turns on the light. It disappeared in that moment. Though I still hear the strange sound, so I ask my mom what the sound is, and if the washer was going. She goes and looks. Neither machine is running, and for whatever reason, this woman takes one look at me, feels my head to see if I have a fever, which I didn't, and then tells me I have a fever, and that's why I'm seeing stuff like that. So I try and calm, and she leaves the room, turns the kitchen light back off, and sure enough, there this guy is again, still tipping that hat over and over. I managed to roll over and fall asleep somehow after. I still mention the story to my sister, and she still very vividly remembers every bit of it. I always said it was a hat man, but the thing is, what I've read and heard on the hat man is not anything like this. My mother later also recounted the story, and later told me that though she didn't see or hear what I did, she only told me I had a fever to calm me down. She knew that it wasn't a fever causing it. Thoughts? I'm not a trucker, but I'm a territory manager, and my territory goes from New Mexico to Alabama and up to Kansas, so it's not uncommon for me to drive to Dallas, Texas to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then from Albuquerque to Montgomery, Alabama, and then back to Dallas all in 1 week. I've got a couple. I work for a premium off-road lighting company, so we work in the deserts at night a lot, usually with trophy trucks and Ultra 4 race teams. Last year, I was coming home from the King of Hammers, and it was about 4:30 a.m., and I was on a state highway through the desert in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven it, you're basically as far from anything out in the desert as you possibly could be. Impossibly straight, one-lane highways that stretch from 100 miles. I was awake and alert even though it was so late, and I was totally alone on the road and had been for hours. Suddenly, without warning, while I was trucking along going about 80 miles an hour, the most insanely bright light came out right off my tailgate. It was so bright it lit up everything in the cab. It was so blinding. I thought one of our race teams had snuck up behind me or something and turned on their light bars to screw with me. I drive and wrap in branded distinct show trucks, so it happens a lot. The light stayed on my ass for a good 30 seconds and would stay right on my ass, even when I'd swerve a bit or when I moved onto the shoulder a bit. If they would pass, it was weird. It was like that light was bolted on the back of my truck or something. After about 30 seconds, I had enough, so I flipped on my rear-facing lights to give them a taste of their own medicine. Instantly, the light behind me went off, and there was nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Even though I was kind of blinded, I have some really powerful backup lights, and they come on the second the other lights went out, so there's no way whatsoever another vehicle was behind me. And there was just a wide open flat desert all around, so it's not like they could have just pulled off and hid. I would have been seeing them anyways. Just nothing. I was totally freaked out, but I'm not an easy scare, and very comfortable with being in the desert alone at night. So I pulled over, grabbed my knife and my flashlight, had a look around. I shone my flashlight all around and even some of my portable hyperspots. Again, I work for a lighting company, and I always carry around a ton of demo lights. To look all around me for anything, and there was nothing. No cars, no trucks, aircraft, UFOs, nothing at all except wide open empty New Mexico desert. My truck was totally fine, but I know I wasn't just seeing things because the back of my truck was hot, like way hotter than normal. All the metal on the backside of the tailgate was almost uncomfortable to the touch. I've never figured it out. The only logical possibility I can think of is ball lightning before apparently it's attracted to metal objects. Maybe I found some ball lightning and it stuck to the back of my truck. I've got more stories if anyone's interested. My job has us spend a ton of money way out in the desert, way too late. Here's another one. Ghost headlights. One time I was driving home back from Phoenix, Arizona, and left Phoenix at about 11 p.m., so I could be home near Dallas by early evening. About 3 a.m., I had made it to another one of these super long, barren, stretched out deserts near Las Cruces or El Paso or who knows. Somewhere on I-10 with dozens of miles between exits and no service roads. I remember thinking how weird it was. I was the only person on the road. I distinctly remember it because it was so dark. A minute or two later, I glanced in the rear view and saw headlights in the distance behind me. Maybe 1/2 or 3/4 of a mile behind. Super weird. Those for sure headlights, but I hadn't passed any on ramps, and there were no troopers hiding off in the road or on the shoulder. Write it off to coincidence. The headlights followed me for a few minutes, never really got closer or farther away, looked away for a split second and looked back. They were gone. Hadn't passed an exit. Didn't see them pull off nothing. I mean, who knows? Maybe in hindsight, it was just a really sneaky trooper who followed me for a bit, see if I was speeding or drunk, but I really would feel like I would have seen them. I was running my big light bar as well, so it was bright as day in front of the truck. I feel like I would have gotten pulled over in a heartbeat if it was a trooper. Just very creepy in the moment, especially as I'm getting kind of weirded out by people following me from time to time after my experience in Sierra Blanca. Okay, how about a twofer before I go to bed? Part of my job is to lead rides around the OHV trails at events and festivals. I have a nice CB radio in my rig for this purpose. They're rather popular in the off-road community to communicate with vehicle to vehicle on trails. I use it occasionally to talk to truckers and bullshit with them on traffic jams. A CB radio can transmit and receive on 40 different channels, and mine has a function where it can run through the channels and listen for a second or two, detect if the signal starts coming through on another channel. That'll be important later. So I'm working on an off-road ramp event in California, and I'd been on the road for a few weeks, and I wasn't ready to come home to the wife and family, so I decided to leave the event mid-afternoon and start making the 20-something hour drive home into the night. I'm a night owl and don't mind loading up on the monster and beef jerky and just bombing the night and get home faster. So once again, I find myself way out in the desert, way too late. This time, I'm on I-10 in Arizona or West New Mexico. It all looks the same after you go driving long enough. There's a section where you pass a sign that says, "Next service, gas, food, water, 126 miles." And that is creepy enough to see at 3:30 a.m. I was about 40 miles past this sign, and I decided walking, taking a breather, and spotted a fun-looking little trail going off into the desert. Again, marketing loves us when we take a second here, and there's a picture of the trucks doing off-roady stuff, and I work for a lighting company, so I figured I'd take a zoo into the desert, turn on the lights, get some cool night shots. So I drive about 2 or 3 miles off the highway into the desert, and I soon find myself in a nice little spot. I get out, my camera out, set up the tripod, start taking pictures of the truck. And I notice there is a green glow in the cab of the truck. Remember my CB? Earlier in the day, it had turned on and left sitting in the passenger seat. It's kind of where the volume control and the screen fit into the handset, and the radio box is hidden in the center console. I had set it to scan the channels and detect new input, which is the common practice at off-road events. If you don't know channel, everyone is on. And then at some point, instead of turning it off, I just turn it way down and never notice it was still on. I grabbed it to turn it off and kill the light, and I heard faint music and noticed it was locked on channel 37. I tuned it up, and sure as shit, the radio was picking up music. It was really slow, sad, violin music. Sounded like the cover of All Along the Watchtower they did for Sons of Anarchy, but sadder. It made every fucking hair in my body stand on end because of the very creepy shit and the mad multitude of reasons. But first and foremost, because CBs do not have a very long range, maybe 2 to 3 miles, and this transmission was super strong, so whatever it was transmitting was close. Also, while I've never seen it strictly enforced, the FCC or whoever doesn't like it, if you do, sold uninterrupted broadcast on CB. So whoever was doing it obviously didn't care about the legality. Also, channel 37 is a weird channel to be on. 19 is a trucker channel, and most of the people I wheel with use 24 for trail comms. I've never seen 37 used. If you're going to play music, why play it on such an odd channel all the way at the top of the band? It was creepy as fuck hearing that music and have no idea who or what could possibly be around, why they felt the need to transmit that music on the radio. Got the fuck out of there pretty quick and kept listening to see if I could gauge how close I was. By the time I got 2 to 3 miles away from the highway, it died and it wasn't audible from the highway. That means whatever was transmitting either stationary out in the desert or hadn't followed me or was moving very slowly. I kept moving down the interstate pretty quick after that. And I really wish I had taken note of exactly where I was because I've wanted to go find that trail and see if I pick up anything weird on the radio again. But it was so dark and so late, I really don't remember exactly where I was.